Long ago, during the last great ice age, the world looked very different than it does today. Massive glaciers covered much of the Earth, and because so much water was frozen in ice, the sea levels were much lower. This created a land bridge that connected Asia and North America. This bridge, known as Beringia, was a vast, cold grassland. People from Siberia followed the great herds of animals, like woolly mammoths and bison, across this land. They were the first humans to ever set foot in the Americas. These early hunter-gatherers were incredibly resourceful, adapting to the harsh, unforgiving environment as they slowly populated a new continent. Their journey was not a single event but a long process of migration that occurred over thousands of years. Over many centuries, these first peoples spread throughout the vast lands of what we now call Alaska. They settled in different regions and developed unique cultures based on the resources available to them. In the far north, the Inupiat and Yupik peoples learned to hunt whales, seals, and walruses in the icy Arctic waters. Their survival depended on a deep understanding of the sea ice and the animals that lived there. They built special boats like the umiak and the kayak to navigate the cold ocean. Their lives were tied to the seasons, from the long, dark winters to the bright summers of the midnight sun. They developed sophisticated tools and clothing from animal skins, bone, and driftwood to protect themselves from the extreme cold. In the coastal regions of the south, groups like the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian thrived in a much different environment. The temperate rainforest provided them with enormous cedar trees, which they used to build large plank houses and carve magnificent totem poles. These poles told the stories of their families, their history, and their beliefs. The ocean was also a source of great wealth for them, especially the salmon that returned to the rivers each year in massive numbers. They were expert fishermen and traders, creating complex societies with rich artistic and ceremonial traditions. Their social structure was highly organized with clans and houses that held distinct rights and territories. Further west along the windswept Aleutian Islands lived the Aleut, or Unangax people. They were masters of the sea, known for their incredible skill in hunting sea otters and other marine mammals from their sleek, skin-covered kayaks called bidarkas. Their connection to the ocean was absolute, providing them with food, tools, clothing, and spiritual inspiration. These diverse native groups, the Inupiat, Yupik, Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian, Aleut, and Athabascan peoples of the interior, were the original inhabitants of Alaska. For thousands of years they lived in balance with the land, developing rich cultures and deep knowledge of their environments long before outsiders ever arrived. In the 18th century, a new chapter in Alaska's history began. The Russian Empire, under the rule of Tsar Peter the Great, was eager to expand its territory and influence eastward across Siberia. In 1728, a Danish explorer named Vitus Bering, sailing for the Russian Navy, was sent on a mission to see if Asia and North America were connected. While his first voyage was inconclusive, a second expedition in 1741 brought Bering and his crew to the shores of Alaska. Though Bering himself died during the return journey, his surviving crew members brought back a valuable cargo, the lustrous pelts of sea otters. These furs were incredibly valuable in China, sparking a fur rush that would change Alaska forever. The promise of wealth from the fur trade attracted Russian hunters and traders, known as promyshleniki. They sailed from Siberia to the Aleutian Islands and the Alaskan coast in search of soft gold. Their primary target was the sea otter, whose fur was the most prized of all. The promyshlenikis' methods were often brutal. They forced the native Aleut men, who were expert hunters, to hunt for them. They would take women and children as hostages to ensure the men would bring back enough furs. This system led to violence, the spread of new diseases, and a drastic decline in the Aleut population. The Russians established small settlements and trading posts, disrupting the traditional ways of life that had existed for millennia. To manage this chaotic and often violent trade, the Russian government chartered the Russian-American Company in 1799. This company was given a monopoly over all trade and colonization in Russian America. Under the leadership of its first chief manager, Alexander Baranov, the company expanded its operations. Baranov was an ambitious and ruthless administrator who established a permanent headquarters at Sitka, which he called New Archangel. He pushed the company's reach further south, bringing it into conflict with the powerful Tlingit people. The Tlingit fiercely resisted Russian encroachment on their lands, leading to several violent clashes including the Battle of Sitka in 1804. For over a century, the Russian-American company controlled Alaska. It built forts, trading posts, and Orthodox Christian churches, leaving a lasting cultural mark on the region. Many Russian Orthodox missionaries came to Alaska, and unlike the traders, some worked to protect Native Alaskans from the company's worst abuses. They learned native languages, created alphabets, and translated religious texts. However, the colony was never very profitable for Russia. The sea otter population had been hunted nearly to extinction, and the great distance from the Russian capital made it extremely difficult and expensive to supply and defend the remote settlements. By the mid-19th century, the era of Russian America was coming to a close. By the 1860s, Russia was facing many challenges. The Crimean War had weakened the empire, and it was clear that defending its distant Alaskan colony would be nearly impossible, especially against the naval power of Great Britain. The Russian-American company was struggling financially as the fur trade declined. Officials in St. Petersburg began to think that selling the territory might be the best course of action. They decided to approach the United States, a growing nation with a stated belief in manifest destiny, the idea that it was destined to expand across the North American continent. The Russians saw the United States as a potential partner and a buffer against their British rivals. The main champion for the purchase of Alaska in the United States was William H. Seward, the Secretary of State. Seward was a firm believer in American expansion and saw great potential in the Northern Territory. He envisioned Alaska as a strategic gateway for trade with Asia and a land rich in untapped resources. He secretly negotiated with the Russian minister to the United States, Eduard de Stoeckel. On March 30, 1867, they agreed on a price, $7.2 million. This amounted to about 2 cents per acre for a piece of land more than twice the size of Texas. The deal was done quickly and quietly, surprising many in the American government and public. The purchase treaty had to be approved by the United States Senate, and many Americans were skeptical. Newspapers mocked the deal, calling Alaska Media Group 1867 newspaper headlines about Alaska, Seward's Folly newspaper clipping, caricature mocking Alaska purchase at its stock at it distribute _equally, Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox, and President Andrew Johnson's Polar Bear Garden. Critics argued that the United States was paying millions of dollars for a barren, frozen wasteland. Why would the country want a remote territory of ice, snow, and polar bears? Seward, however, launched a powerful campaign to convince the public and Congress of Alaska's value. He spoke of its vast forests, rich fisheries, and potential for mineral wealth. With a persuasive speech to the Senate, he secured ratification of the treaty on April 9, 1867. The formal transfer of Alaska from Russia to the United States took place on October 18, 1867, in a ceremony at Sitka. The Russian flag was lowered and the American flag was raised. For the United States, it was the beginning of a new frontier. For the native Alaskan peoples, however, the transfer was made without their consent or even their knowledge. They were not considered citizens of Russia or the United States and were largely ignored in the transaction. The American government initially showed little interest in governing its new possession, leaving it under the control of the United States Army for its first decade, a period of neglect that did little to improve the lives of its inhabitants. For many years after the purchase, Alaska remained a sparsely populated and largely ignored district. The federal government provided very little in terms of law, order, or services. This period of neglect ended dramatically with the Klondike Gold Rush in 1897 and 98. When news spread that gold had been discovered in the Klondike region of Canada's Yukon Territory, near the Alaskan border, tens of thousands of prospectors from all over the world rushed north. Most of them traveled through the Alaskan port towns of Skagway and Dyea, transforming them overnight into bustling, lawless cities. This massive influx of people brought Alaska to the nation's attention in a way nothing had before. While the Klondike gold was in Canada, the rush led to further discoveries within Alaska itself, in places like Nome and Fairbanks. The gold rushes brought people, investment, and a demand for better governance. In response, Congress passed the Organic Act of 1912, which officially organized the District of Alaska into the Territory of Alaska. This gave Alaskans a limited form of self-government, including their own legislature. However, they still did not have a voting representative in the United States Congress, and the territory's governor was appointed by the president. The territorial years saw the growth of key industries like salmon canning and copper mining, but many Alaskans felt their interests were controlled by powerful companies based in Seattle and San Francisco. The turning point on the path to statehood was World War II. Alaska's strategic location, close to Asia, became critically important to the United States after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese military even invaded and occupied two of the Aleutian Islands, Attu and Kiska, in 1942. This was the first time American soil had been occupied by a foreign enemy since the War of 1812. The United States military responded by building the Alaska Highway and establishing numerous bases throughout the territory. This military buildup brought thousands of service members and civilian workers to Alaska, many of whom stayed after the war ended, significantly boosting the population. After the war, the movement for statehood gained powerful momentum. Alaskans argued that they had proven their loyalty and strategic importance to the nation. They wanted the full rights of American citizenship, including the ability to elect their own governor and have voting members in Congress. Led by figures like Ernest Gruening and Bob Bartlett, they campaigned tirelessly. Finally, after years of debate, Congress passed the Alaska Statehood Act. On January 3, 1959, President Dwight D. Eisenhower officially proclaimed Alaska the 49th state of the Union. Today, Alaska remains the last frontier, a land of immense natural beauty, vital resources, and a unique history that blends its ancient native roots with its Russian and American heritage.